At 2 o'clock in the morning on July 17, 1918, 11 executioners crowded into a basement room and opened fire on 11 prisoners at point-blank range. It should have been over in seconds. It wasn't. When the smoke cleared, several of the children were still alive, and the reason was hidden inside their clothing. The world would be told that Russia's last Tsar had been shot. What history rarely admits is what actually happened in that room and how long it took. Nicholas Alexandrovich Romanov was born on May 18, 1868, heir to a dynasty that had ruled Russia for 300 years and an empire covering 1/6 of the land surface of the earth. He was, by nearly every account, the wrong man for the job. Gentle, polite, painfully indecisive. A man built for quiet family evenings, handed absolute power over 130 million people. His father, Alexander III, was a giant who famously bent iron pokers for amusement. Nicholas was 5'7" and hated confrontation. Then, in 1894, the giant suddenly died at 49, and everything fell on the son. Nicholas was 26. He reportedly confessed to his cousin, "I am not prepared to be a Tsar." A week after the funeral, he married the woman he had loved for years, Alix of Hesse, a German princess who took the name Alexandra Fyodorovna. Russians whispered that their new empress had come to them. Behind a coffin. It was an ugly superstition. It would prove horribly accurate. The omens kept arriving. At his coronation celebrations in May 1896, 500,000 people crammed onto Kodinka Field outside Moscow for free beer and souvenir cups. A rumor spread that there wasn't enough for everyone. The crowd surged. More than 1,000 people were crushed and trampled to death in the panic. And that same evening, on the insistence of his advisors, the new Tsar and Tsarina attended a glittering ball at the French embassy. Russia never entirely forgave the dancing. The rain had opened over a field of corpses, and the empire's misfortunes were only beginning. At home, though, Nicholas got the one thing he genuinely wanted, a family. 4 daughters arrived, Olga in 1895, Tatiana in 1897, Maria in 1899, Anastasia in 1901. Then, in August 1904, the miracle, a son. Alexei, heir to the throne. Within weeks, the celebration curdled. The baby bled from the navel, and the bleeding would not stop. The diagnosis was hemophilia. His blood could not properly clot. There was no treatment. A bruise could cripple him. A fall could kill him. And the imperial couple made a fateful decision. The empire would never be told. The future of the Romanov dynasty now rested on a boy who could bleed to death from a stumble, and the secrecy around him would help destroy them all. Because secrecy created a vacuum, and into it walked Grigory Rasputin, an unwashed Siberian mystic who, time after time, seemed able to calm the boy's bleeding when the doctors could not. To Alexandra, he was sent by God. To everyone else, he was a walking scandal. A peasant with a notorious reputation, whispering in the Empress's ear. The rumors grew filthier by the year, and the monarchy's credibility bled out alongside its heir. In December 1916, aristocrats desperate to save the crown murdered Rasputin and dumped his body in a frozen river. They were about a decade too late. By then, Russia was drowning in the First World War. In 1915, Nicholas made perhaps the most disastrous decision of his reign. He took personal command of the army. Every defeat, every casualty list, every frozen corpse at the front now carried his name. While back in the capital, bread ran out, and the German-born Empress ran the government through a revolving door of incompetence. In March 1917, bread riots in Petrograd became a mutiny, and the mutiny became a revolution. On March 15th, in a railway carriage at Pskov, Nicholas abdicated, and in the same stroke signed away his son's throne too, because the doctors warned that the fragile boy could never survive being separated from his family. 304 years of Romanov rule ended with a signature reportedly made in pencil. Nicholas hoped only to retire quietly with his wife and children. Instead, the family became prisoners, and every move they made from that day on took them somewhere darker. First came house arrest at their own palace, gardening, lessons, guards who mocked them through the fence. In August 1917, the provisional government shipped them to Tobolsk deep in Siberia. For their own protection, it was said. Then the Bolsheviks seized power, and protection stopped being anyone's priority. Rations shrank, the guards hardened. And in Tobolsk, something quiet began that almost nobody noticed. The Empress and her daughters took up sewing. Hour after hour, day after day, needles working behind closed doors. The guards saw harmless needlework. It was nothing of the kind, and that sewing would decide exactly how each of them died. In the spring of 1918, disaster struck from inside. Alexei suffered his worst bleeding crisis in years, a hemorrhage that left the 13-year-old unable to walk. At that exact moment, Moscow ordered the family moved again. The boy could not travel. So the Bolsheviks split them, and Alexandra faced a heartbreaking choice. Stay with her critically ill son, or follow her husband toward an unknown fate. She chose Nicholas. Maria went with them. The other children stayed behind with Alexei until he could be moved. In May 1918, the family was finally reunited in a mansion with a name that should have terrified them, the House of Special Purpose. It was a merchant's home in Yekaterinburg, requisitioned by the local Soviet, ringed by a double palisade. Its windows painted over with whitewash, so the family couldn't even see the street. Their household was cut to 4. Dr. Eugene Botkin, the family physician, who had been free to walk away to a comfortable life and chose to follow them into captivity instead. The maid Anna Demidova, the cook Ivan Karitonov, the footman Alexei Trupp. Exercise was rationed. Letters were read. Then, on July 4th, 1918, the guard changed. The new commandant was Yakov Yurovsky, a former photographer turned secret policeman Meticulous, humorless, a true believer. The family actually considered him an improvement because he's stopped the guards from stealing their belongings. They mistook a bookkeeper's tidiness for decency. Yurovsky wasn't there to bring order. He was there to work through a schedule. On the morning of July 16th, the first item was quietly ticked off. The kitchen boy, Leonid Sednev. 14 years old, Alexei's playmate, was suddenly taken from the house, supposedly to visit his uncle. There was no uncle waiting. Yurovsky had removed him, so the child wouldn't be in the room for what came next. The family noticed and grew anxious. They were smoothly reassured. That evening, Alexandra sat and wrote her diary entry for the day. It records a card game. Played Bezique with N. She was in bed by 10:30. Hours earlier, the final order from the Ural Soviet had reached Yurovsky. Whether Moscow explicitly commanded the killings remains one of history's disputed questions. No signed order from Lenin has ever been found, and the strongest evidence suggests the local Soviet made the decision while Moscow was kept informed and raised no objection. Either way, a truck was booked for midnight. Its cargo would be bodies. The truck arrived late, around 1:30 a.m. Just after 2, Dr. Botkin was woken and told to rouse the family. There was unrest in the town, shooting in the streets, and everyone must move downstairs for their own safety. It was a lie built out of their last hope. The family spent about 40 minutes washing and dressing. The daughters taking particular care with their underclothes. Nicholas carried his son down the 23 steps himself. Alexei's leg still hadn't healed. Across a courtyard, into a bare half-basement room roughly 5 meters by 6. Alexandra, exhausted, asked for chairs, and Yurovsky sent for 2. She took one. Alexei was placed in the other. The daughters stood behind their parents, with the 4 servants around them. 11 people settling, almost instinctively, into the arrangement of a formal family portrait. Nicholas was 50, Alexandra was 46, Olga was 22, Tatiana 21, Maria 19, Anastasia 17. Alexei's was a month short of his 14th birthday. Then Yurovsky walked in with 10 armed men and a piece of paper. He read it fast. The Ural Executive Committee had resolved that they were all to be shot. Nicholas turned to his family, turned back, and managed, by Yurovsky's own account, only. What? Yurovsky shot him first, and the Tsar died almost instantly. He would prove the fortunate one. The room detonated. Each executioner had been assigned a specific victim. Instead, nearly all of them fired at Nicholas, then at anyone they could see. In a brick box that small, the noise alone was devastating. Shooters were partly deafened, others scorched by muzzle flash, and within seconds, gunsmoke and plaster dust made it impossible to see or breathe. Bullets ricocheted off the walls. Yurovsky, furious at his squad's indiscipline, had to scream for a ceasefire and throw open the doors just so his own men could gulp air. And when the smoke thinned, the killers saw something that made no sense at all. The daughters were alive. Alexei was alive, still in his chair. The maid Demidova was alive against the back wall, clutching a small pillow like a shield. They tried bayonets, and the blades skidded off the young women's bodies as if striking armor plate. Bullets had visibly failed to penetrate. The men could not understand what they were hitting, so they finished it the only way left. Close-range shots to the head, one victim at a time. One guard emptied an entire magazine into the seated Alexei before Yurovsky stepped in and ended the boy's life with 2 shots from his revolver. Demidova ran along the wall, her pillow absorbing thrust after thrust until she too was killed. Modern reconstructions estimate around 70 bullets were fired in that room. From the reading of the sentence to the final silence took roughly 20 minutes. Yurovsky's men staggered out, having produced a slaughter, not an execution. And the strangeness of it, the bullets that refused to kill, still had no explanation. The explanation was waiting in the forest. Around 3 a.m., the bodies were loaded onto a truck and driven toward the Koptyaki forest, more than 14 kilometers away. At an abandoned mineshaft called Ganina Yama, the dead were stripped. And as the clothing came away, the burial party made a discovery that stopped them cold. One Yurovsky confiscated and inventoried down to the gram. Even then, nothing went to plan. The shaft was too shallow. Grenades failed to collapse it. Over the following 2 nights, with 180 kilograms of sulfuric acid and hundreds of liters of gasoline, procured for the task, the Bolsheviks tried to make 11 human beings disappear. On July 19th, the truck bogged down in mud at a spot called Porozenkov Log, and Yurovsky simply stopped improvising. 9 bodies were doused with acid and buried in a shallow pit under railroad ties, barely 60 centimeters deep. 2. Alexei and one of his sisters were burned separately and buried about 70 meters away. The Bolsheviks believed they had erased the Romanovs from the earth. What they had actually done was plant a mystery that would last 90 years. 8 days later, on July 25th, the White Army took Yekaterinburg. Investigators reached the Ipatiev House and found the basement scrubbed. But the walls testified anyway, bullet holes and bayonet gouges clustered low near the floor. At the mine, investigator Nikolai Sokolov recovered a severed finger, Dr. Botkin's dentures, charred fragments, and the crushed body of Jemmy, Anastasia's little spaniel. Alexei's dog, Joy, was found alive, wandering the courtyard, still waiting. Sokolov concluded the bodies had been burned entirely to ash. A reasonable guess, and completely wrong, and his error left the door to legend standing wide open. The Soviets, meanwhile, announced only that Nicholas had been executed and that his wife and son had been moved to a place of safety. The family was, at that moment, dissolving under a dirt road. On the strength of that lie, impostors bloomed for decades. Most famously, a woman pulled from a Berlin canal in 1920 who spent the next 60 years claiming to be Anastasia, spawning books, films, and court battles. As long as bodies were missing, the fairy tale could breathe. Then the forest finally gave up what Yurovsky had buried, and with it the answer to that night. Because the mystery of the failed bullets had been stitched into place months earlier, back in Tobolsk. All that quiet sewing had a purpose. Under Alexandra's direction, the Grand Duchesses had concealed the family's portable fortune: diamonds, pearls, gemstones, inside their camisoles and corsets, referred to in family letters, in some accounts by the code word medicines. It was an escape fund, insurance for a rescue they still believed was coming. Instead, on the night of July 17th, those densely packed jewels worked like body armor. They deflected revolver bullets. They turned bayonet blades. Even Demidova's little pillow was stuffed with hidden valuables. From the daughter's clothing alone, Yurovsky's men recovered roughly 1.3 kilograms of diamonds. In total, over 8 kilograms of valuables were catalogued and shipped to the Soviet state, reportedly after guards who had pocketed pieces were forced, under threat, to hand them back. The brutal arithmetic of that night is this: the hidden wealth of the Russian Empire could not save a single Romanov, but it guaranteed that the youngest of them died slowest. The final mystery took longer to die. In 1979, 2 researchers secretly located the main grave using Yurovsky's own buried report. Then, terrified of the KGB, reburied the bones and said nothing for a decade. In 1991, as the Soviet Union collapsed, the pit at Porozenkov log was officially opened. 9 skeletons. In 1994, DNA analysis published in Nature Genetics matched the remains to living relatives, including Prince Philip, a blood relation of Alexandra through the female line, identifying Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 of the daughters. That same year, DNA closed the Anastasia question from the other side. The famous claimant was no Romanov at all, but Franziska Szankowska, a missing Polish factory worker. Still, 2 bodies were absent from that grave, a boy and 1 young woman, and so the legend limped on. Then, in 2007, searchers found a second, smaller pit, 70 meters from the first, holding burned bone fragments, bullets, and shards of the jars that had carried the sulfuric acid. Independent laboratories in the United States and Austria ran the DNA, and the results, published in 2009, were described as virtually irrefutable. Alexei and one of his sisters. Every one of the 11 people led into that basement was finally accounted for. In 1998, 9 of them were laid to rest in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, and further testing in 2015 reconfirmed it all. The diamonds sewn in to buy the Romanovs a future bought them only the longest 20 minutes of the dynasty's 300 years. And nearly a century later, science finished what the bullets started. It killed the fairy tale. No one ever walked out of that room. Thanks for watching History's Hidden Lives. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, Hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us.